When my daughter-in-law told me to leave her house, I didn't argue. I didn't cry, I didn't shout, and I didn't even ask her why. I just smiled, because at that moment, I finally understood everything. People often say that you only realize someone's true nature when life tests you, but for me that realization didn't come from a stranger. It came from the woman my son loved more than anything in this world, the woman I welcomed into our home, into our family, and into my heart. Her words that day still echo in my mind, soft but sharp, like glass breaking in silence. "Maybe it's time you find your own place, Mom. We need our privacy." She said it so politely with that practiced smile of hers that for a second I thought I had misheard. But when I looked into her eyes, there was no warmth, no hesitation, only quiet annoyance. That day, something inside me broke. But not loudly. It was a quiet, painful breaking, the kind you only feel in your chest when you've loved too deeply. I stood there, in the middle of the living room I had once decorated for them, and realized I had become a guest in my own home. My name is Margaret. I'm 48 years old. For most of my life, I believed I was a good mother. Maybe not perfect, but good enough to raise a kind, respectful man. And for a long time, I truly believed my son Daniel was exactly that. Kind, respectful, loving. He used to hold my hand while crossing the street even when he was 12. He'd say, "Mom, one day I'll take care of you the way you took care of me." I never doubted his words. I carried them like a promise in my heart. When his father passed away 10 years ago, Daniel became my reason to keep going. He was my strength on the days I couldn't find my own. We were close, not just mother and son, but friends too. So when he met Emma, I was happy. Truly happy. She was everything a mother hopes for her son. Educated, polite, beautiful, and confident. The first time she came over for dinner, she brought flowers and helped me set the table. She laughed at Daniel's jokes, complimented my cooking, and told me how lucky she felt to have him. That night, I remember thinking, God really answered my prayers. I thought she would become the daughter I never had. But love, the kind of love that blinds, can turn even the purest hopes into painful lessons. When they got married, I didn't expect my life to change much. I had my little job at the local library and my quiet evenings reading by the window. They moved into Daniel's old room for a few months until they could save for their own place. At first, everything was peaceful. Emma would ask for my recipes, help me fold laundry, and call me Mom so sweetly that it melted my heart. I tried not to interfere in their relationship. I gave them space, but little by little, I started feeling like that space was growing, not just between them, but between me and my son. It began with small things. Daniel stopped joining me for tea in the morning like he used to. When I asked him if he'd like dinner early, he'd say, "We already ordered takeout." "Mom, don't bother." Emma started closing their bedroom door more often, even when I just wanted to ask if they needed anything. It's funny how silence can fill a house faster than words. There were days when the only sound I'd hear was the washing machine. I told myself, they're newlyweds. It's normal. I reminded myself that I was once young too. I wanted privacy, freedom, a space to love and grow. But the heart doesn't always understand what the mind accepts. One evening I overheard them talking in the kitchen. I hadn't meant to listen. I was walking down the hallway to grab my tea, and their voices just floated out. Emma said softly, "I feel like we don't have a life of our own, Daniel. Your mom is always here." Daniel didn't answer right away. He just sighed, that sigh. It said more than words ever could. I froze. For the first time, I felt like a burden. Not a mother, not family. just someone who took up too much space. I went back to my room quietly and sat on the bed. For a long time, I stared at the framed picture of Daniel as a child, holding my hand at the beach. His little fingers gripping mine so tightly, as if he'd never let go. And yet, here we were. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept thinking, maybe I was too present. Maybe I had become a shadow in their marriage. The next morning, I tried to make things easier. I started leaving the house earlier, spending more hours at work, pretending I had errands so they could have time alone. When I came back, I'd make dinner quietly and retreat to my room. I smiled when I saw them together, even when it hurt. Because a mother's love doesn't stop, even when she feels unwanted. But the distance didn't shrink. It only grew, and soon Emma's politeness started to fade too. She'd correct me in front of Daniel over little things, how I folded the towels, how I cooked. Once I made her favorite dish for dinner, but she just picked at it and said, "It's a little too salty." Daniel laughed and said, "Mom, you're losing your touch." I laughed too. But later that night, I cried in the bathroom so quietly that even the walls wouldn't hear. Still, I tried to see the good in her. I told myself she was young, she didn't mean to hurt me. Maybe she just wanted her own space. But deep down, something told me, this wasn't just about space. Months passed. They found a new house, a bigger one closer to Daniel's office. I helped them pack, organized boxes, labeled everything carefully. When moving day came, I watched them load their car with excitement. And just when I thought they'd leave, Daniel turned to me and said, "Mom, you should come with us. There's a guest room. You shouldn't be alone." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to stay behind, to not intrude. But another part of me, the lonely part, the mother part, felt relieved. So I went. The new house was beautiful. Bright walls, big kitchen, and a cozy garden outside. But something about it didn't feel like home to me. Maybe because it wasn't mine. I tried to make myself useful, cleaning, cooking, helping with bills. I thought, if I show them I can make their lives easier, they'll never feel I'm in the way. But instead of gratitude, I started noticing irritation in Emma's eyes. If I folded laundry, she'd refold it. If I cooked, she'd order food anyway. If I tried to talk to Daniel, she'd change the subject. And slowly, Daniel changed too. He'd come home tired, barely talk to me, and spend the evening with her. When I tried to tell him how I felt, he'd pat my shoulder and say, "You're overthinking, Mom. Emma's just stressed." I smiled and nodded. Because what else could I do? No mother wants to be the reason her son feels torn. Then one day, it happened. The moment that changed everything. It was a Sunday afternoon. Emma was having her friends over for lunch. I had spent the morning cleaning the kitchen and setting the table. When her friends arrived, I smiled and greeted them. But I noticed the way they looked at me. Curious, almost amused. Emma laughed and said, "Oh, that's Daniel's mom. She lives with us for now." For now. The words stung, but I said nothing. During lunch, I stayed mostly quiet, just helping serve. Then one of her friends asked, "Isn't it hard living with your mother-in-law?" Emma smiled, that same polite smile, and then said, "Well, sometimes it's challenging. You know how moms can be? They like things done their way." Everyone laughed. Even Daniel smiled awkwardly. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, but I forced a smile too. I went to the kitchen to bring dessert, and as I was serving it, Emma said, almost jokingly, "Maybe one day she'll find her own little place. Then we'll finally have the house to ourselves." The room went silent for a second, and then someone chuckled to break the tension. I felt my hands tremble as I placed the plates down. Daniel looked at her, and then at me, but said nothing. That silence was louder than any words he could have spoken. I excused myself, walked into my room, and closed the door behind me. That was the first time I truly realized I didn't belong there anymore. I sat on my bed for a long time that day. I didn't cry. Tears wouldn't have helped. Instead, I thought about how love changes. How the same love that once protects you can slowly push you away. How a home can feel so full one day and so empty the next. I thought about leaving, about packing my bags quietly and slipping out before anyone noticed. But I couldn't, because despite everything, that was still my son. And she was still the woman he loved. So I stayed, at least for a while longer, hoping, foolishly, that things would change. That one day she would see the woman behind the title, mother-in-law, that she'd see me not as an obstacle, but as someone who wanted to belong. But I was wrong, and the day she told me to leave, I finally stopped hoping. After that lunch with Emma's friends, something inside me changed. I still tried to act normal, but there was a heaviness in the air that never really went away. Every time I passed by the dining table, I could still hear their laughter. That small, careless laughter that made me feel like I was just an unwanted guest. I began avoiding the living room whenever Emma had visitors. I would quietly stay in my room, reading or pretending to be busy. But no matter how much I tried to disappear, it always felt like my presence bothered her. It was strange. How a house could feel so big, yet leave no room for me. One evening, Daniel came home late. He looked tired, his shoulders drooping, his eyes red from exhaustion. I had stayed up waiting. His favorite stew kept warm on the stove. When he walked in, I said softly, "You must be hungry, sweetheart." "I made dinner." But Emma came from behind him and said quickly, "Oh, Mom, we already ate out. You don't have to cook for us all the time." Her tone wasn't rude, but it wasn't kind either. It carried a hint of irritation, as if my care had become unnecessary. Daniel smiled faintly at me, kissed my forehead, and said, "Next time, Mom, okay?" I smiled back, but my heart felt heavy. I turned off the stove, wrapped the pot, and placed it in the fridge. I knew I'd eat it alone tomorrow. As I washed the dishes, I thought about how, just a few years ago, Daniel would never end his day without sitting beside me and talking about work, about life. Now, it felt like I had lost him to someone who couldn't even see how much I loved him. Days turned into weeks. I started noticing small things, things most people would ignore, but a mother always notices. Emma began rearranging the house. She took down the family photos from the hallway, the ones of Daniel as a child, the ones of me and his father. She replaced them with modern art and decorative mirrors. When I asked where the photos were, she said, "Oh, they didn't match the new aesthetic." "Don't worry, they're in a box somewhere." A box. Years of love, memories, and laughter, in a box somewhere. I wanted to argue, but I didn't. I didn't want Daniel to feel caught between us. Instead, I quietly went to my room that night, opened my small wooden drawer, and placed one photo beside my bed, the one of Daniel's first day of school. That picture was all I had left of the little boy who once said, "I'll always protect you, Mom." Then came the birthday. It was my birthday, my 49th. I woke up early like I always do, expecting nothing extravagant, just a warm, happy birthday, and maybe breakfast together. But the house was silent. No one was awake. I made my tea, sat by the kitchen window, and told myself they probably had a surprise planned. By noon, Daniel came downstairs, already dressed for work. I smiled and said, "Good morning." He smiled back. distracted, and said, "Morning, Mom." Then, just before he left, I asked, "Do you need lunch packed?" He said, "No, Emma and I are grabbing lunch out. She has an appointment downtown." And then he left. The silence after the door closed was deafening. I sat there for a moment, holding my teacup tightly, feeling the warmth fade from my hands. Later that evening, I heard laughter outside. I peeked through the window. Daniel and Emma were getting out of the car, holding shopping bags and balloons. I smiled again. Maybe it was my surprise. Maybe they had planned something. But when I heard Emma say, "That dinner was amazing. I'm glad we celebrated your promotion, babe," my smile faded. It wasn't about me. It never was. I went to bed early that night, quietly wishing myself a happy birthday. It wasn't one big thing that broke me. It was 1,000 little moments like that. Moments where I realized I wasn't seen, I wasn't heard, and I wasn't needed. But still, I tried. Because a mother's heart doesn't stop giving, even when it's breaking. One weekend, I decided to cook breakfast for everyone. Pancakes, scrambled eggs, the works. It reminded me of when Daniel was little, how he'd help me whisk the eggs, how he'd giggle when I flipped a pancake too high. When they came downstairs, I said cheerfully, "Breakfast is ready." Emma looked at the table, then at Daniel and said softly, "Oh, we were just heading out for brunch with friends." Daniel hesitated. "Mom, we didn't know you'd cook. We can eat later." I smiled and said, "Go on, it's okay. I'll eat later." But as they left, I stood there looking at the table full of food, warm, untouched, and meaningless. After they left, I sat down alone and ate one pancake, forcing it down with a lump in my throat. It tasted like everything I had become, unnecessary. That afternoon, I took a walk around the neighborhood. I saw mothers playing with their grandkids, couples walking hand in hand. It made me wonder, when did I stop being part of someone's story? When did I become just the background? I sat on a park bench for a long time, thinking about my husband. He would have known what to do. He always had a gentle way of reminding me that love doesn't vanish. It just changes form. But even love can fade when it's one-sided. That evening, I tried talking to Daniel. He was sitting on the couch, scrolling through his phone. I sat beside him and said softly, "Daniel, can I talk to you for a moment?" He looked up, surprised. "Sure, Mom, what's wrong?" I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. I feel like I'm in the way sometimes. I don't want you or Emma to feel uncomfortable." He frowned. "Why would you think that?" I smiled gently. "I just sense things, that's all. I don't want to cause tension." Before he could answer, Emma walked in. She looked at us and said, "Oh, we were just about to watch something. Everything okay?" Daniel looked at me, uncertain. I said quickly, "Yes, everything's fine." "I was just asking how his day was." She smiled, that tight, polite smile, and sat beside him, her hand resting possessively on his arm. I took that as my cue to leave. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying that moment. How quickly the conversation shifted. How invisible I felt sitting next to them. I stared at the ceiling, thinking, maybe I'm the problem. Maybe I'd stayed too long. Over the next few weeks, Emma's tone became sharper. She'd say things like, "Mom, could you please not touch my laundry? I like doing it a certain way." Or, "Mom, I'd appreciate it if you asked before moving things in the kitchen." They were small things, but the way she said them, with that edge of control, made me feel like a stranger in my own life. I noticed how Daniel never corrected her. He just stayed quiet, letting her words linger in the air like dust that never settled. And every time I looked at him, I saw the boy who once promised to take care of me. slowly disappearing behind someone else's shadow. Then came the day that would change everything, though I didn't know it yet. It was early evening, and I was folding laundry in the guest room. I heard voices in the hallway, Emma's and Daniel's, low but tense. Emma said, "We can't keep living like this, Daniel. I feel suffocated. We're married, but it's like we have no space." Daniel sighed. "She's my mom, Emma. What do you expect me to do?" "I expect you to set boundaries," she said firmly. "I've been patient, but I can't keep doing this." There was a long silence. Then Daniel whispered, "I'll talk to her." I froze. The clothes in my hands suddenly felt heavy. It was as if the air had been sucked out of the room. He was going to talk to me about leaving. I sat down on the edge of the bed, staring at the folded clothes in my lap. For a long time, I didn't move. That night, when Daniel came to my room, his voice was soft. "Mom," he said, "can we talk?" I nodded, even though I already knew what he was going to say. He sat beside me, his hands clasped tightly. She feels we don't have enough privacy. She thinks maybe it's time you got your own place." He looked down, unable to meet my eyes. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. It was like every heartbeat I had ever felt for him suddenly stopped. But I smiled, that automatic mother's smile that hides everything. "I understand," I said quietly. "You're married now. You need your space." He looked relieved, as if I had made things easy for him. "Thank you, Mom," he said, and kissed my forehead. When he left, I sat there in the dark, listening to the faint sound of their laughter from the living room. It was then I realized, love doesn't always end with anger. Sometimes it ends with quiet acceptance. From that night on, I began preparing myself, slowly, silently. I started sorting my things, packing little by little. I didn't tell them. I didn't want to make it dramatic. Every night, I'd look around the house one last time. The kitchen where I used to cook for him, the hallway where his school bag once hung, the couch where we used to sit and talk for hours. Each place held a memory, and with every packed box, I felt like I was packing a part of my life away. But deep down, I kept hoping that maybe Daniel would notice. That maybe before I left he'd stop me and say, "Mom, don't go." But that moment never came. I didn't leave right away. I told myself I would wait until after the weekend. One more Sunday, one more breakfast together, one more chance for Daniel to see me, really see me. That Saturday night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, watching the faint glow of streetlights across the lawn. Inside the house, everything was quiet, too quiet. But my mind wasn't. It was filled with 1,000 memories, all tangled together. Daniel's first day of school, his first heartbreak, the night we cried together after his father's funeral, and then his wedding day, the joy, the pride, the hope. Every moment played in my head like a film I couldn't turn off. I wondered what his father would have said if he saw me like this, a guest in the home my love helped build. He would have told me, "Maggie, dignity is quiet strength. When they don't see your worth, you don't shout it. You live it." So I decided, the next morning I'd tell them I was leaving. Not in anger, not in sadness, just with quiet grace. The next morning I woke up early. I made coffee, eggs, and toast. The smell filled the house, familiar, warm, safe. For a moment it almost felt like old times. Daniel came downstairs, sleepy-eyed, hair messy. He smiled faintly when he saw me. "Morning, Mom," I smiled back. "Morning, sweetheart. Breakfast is ready." He sat down, scrolling through his phone. A few minutes later, Emma joined him, dressed neatly, perfume lingering in the air. She looked at the table and said softly, "Oh, I didn't know you were cooking this morning. We were planning to go out." "It's okay," I said with a smile. I just thought we could eat together for once. Daniel looked at Emma. She hesitated, then said, Sure. Just a few minutes. I have to get ready soon anyway. So we sat there, the three of us, eating in silence. The clinking of spoons was the only sound between us. I wanted to say something, anything, but I didn't know how to begin. Halfway through breakfast, Daniel's phone rang. He answered quickly, muttered something about work, and left the table to take the call. And that's when it happened. That moment I would never forget. Emma looked up from her plate, sighed quietly, and said, Margaret, can I be honest with you? Her tone wasn't cruel. It was calm, almost rehearsed. I nodded slowly. I think it's time, she said softly. For you? To have your own space. I froze. Even though I'd been expecting those words, hearing them out loud still hurt like a knife twisting deep inside me. She continued, You've done so much for us, really. But Daniel and we need to build our marriage. We need privacy, freedom. I think you'd be happier too. Maybe somewhere quieter, with people your age. You deserve that. I looked at her, really looked. She wasn't angry. She wasn't shouting. She was simply stating her truth. But that truth broke mine. My voice trembled as I said, And Daniel, does he feel the same? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked down and said, He just doesn't know how to tell you. He loves you, but he's torn. I nodded slowly, feeling my chest tighten. For a moment, the room felt smaller, the air heavier. I wanted to cry, but no tears came. I just whispered, Thank you for being honest. She smiled faintly, relieved, and stood up. I'm glad you understand. I really didn't want this to be awkward. Awkward. That word lingered in the air like smoke. I watched her leave the room, her footsteps echoing down the hallway. Then I looked at the 2 plates on the table, mine and Daniel's, half-eaten, unfinished, forgotten. And I realized this was how love ends sometimes, quietly over cold breakfast. That afternoon, I went to my room and opened the closet. I began folding my clothes slowly, neatly, like I always had. Each piece felt heavier than it should. It wasn't just fabric. It was years of my life, every moment stitched into the seams. As I packed, I found an old box tucked away on the top shelf. Inside were letters Daniel had written to me from college. Mom, thank you for believing in me. Mom, I miss you. Mom, you're my hero. I sat there holding those letters, my hands trembling. He had once written those words with love, and now I was packing them away like they didn't matter anymore. When Daniel came home that evening, I had already finished most of the packing. He walked into my room and froze. Mom, what are you doing? I smiled faintly. You were right. It's time I find my own place. His face softened with guilt. Mom, you don't have to rush, I interrupted gently. I'm not rushing, sweetheart. I just want peace for all of us. He opened his mouth to say something, but no words came. Instead, he sat beside me, head in his hands. I didn't mean for it to come to this. I touched his arm softly. I know you love her, and that's okay. You should. He looked up, eyes watery. You've done nothing wrong. I smiled through the ache in my chest. Then maybe that's the saddest part. The next morning, I woke up early to finish packing. Emma was in the kitchen sipping her coffee. She seemed surprised to see me with my suitcase. You're leaving today? She asked. Yes, I said simply. I already spoke to Daniel. My friend Martha has an extra room for now. Oh, she said, clearly relieved. That's great, I nodded, forcing a smile. I just wanted to say thank you, I added softly, for taking care of him. Her lips curved slightly, unsure. Of course. As I walked toward the door, she suddenly said, Wait. I turned around. I didn't mean to hurt you, Margaret. I just wanted what's best for everyone. Her words were plain, almost mechanical. But I nodded. I know. Sometimes what's best still hurts. And then I left. I walked down the street, dragging my suitcase behind me. The sun was bright, the air cool. People passed by, some smiling, some rushing, and none of them knew that my whole world had just shifted. I stopped for a moment and looked back at the house. The curtains were closed, the front door shut tight. I whispered, "Goodbye, my home," and kept walking. Martha welcomed me with open arms. She was an old friend from work, kind and practical. She showed me the spare room, a small cozy space with a single bed and a window that faced the street. "It's not much," she said, "but it's yours for as long as you need." I smiled gratefully. It's more than enough. That night I unpacked my things and sat by the window. The silence was different here. Not heavy like before, but gentle. I thought I would cry, but I didn't. Instead, I felt a strange peace. I had lost my home, but not myself. A few weeks passed. Daniel called every few days, checking on me. Our conversations were short, polite, and a little awkward. He always sounded guilty, and I always told him I was fine. One day, he called and said, "Mom, Emma, and I want to visit you this weekend." I hesitated, but agreed. When Saturday came, I set the table with tea and cookies. They arrived together, Daniel looking nervous, Emma holding a bouquet of flowers. "Hi, Mom," Daniel said softly, hugging me. Emma smiled awkwardly and handed me the flowers. "For you." "Thank you," I said warmly, placing them in a vase. We sat down, talked about small things, work, weather, the garden outside. It felt almost normal. But under the surface, there was something unsaid, hanging in the air. After a while, Emma looked around the small room. Then she said softly, "This place is nice, peaceful." "Yes," I said. "It's quiet. Sometimes too quiet." She nodded but didn't say anything more. When they left, Daniel hugged me tightly. As he stepped back, I caught Emma watching me, her eyes softer, uncertain, almost guilty. That look stayed with me long after they drove away. Then, a few days later, Daniel called again, his voice shaking. "Mom, Emma's in the hospital." My heart stopped. "What happened?" "She fainted at work. They said it was exhaustion. I'm with her now." I grabbed my coat and hurried there as fast as I could. When I entered the room, Emma was lying in bed, pale and quiet. Daniel looked up, surprised to see me. "Mom," he whispered. "She just fell asleep." I sat beside her, watching the slow rise and fall of her chest. Her hands were cold, fragile. In that moment, all the anger, all the hurt, it just vanished. Because no matter what she'd done, she was still the woman my son loved. I took her hand gently and whispered, "You'll be okay." She opened her eyes faintly, surprised to see me. Her lips trembled. "You came—" "Of course," I said softly. "Family shows up. Always." Tears filled her eyes. "I'm sorry, Margaret." "For everything." Her voice cracked, and for the first time, I saw her, not as my daughter-in-law, not as the woman who pushed me away, but as a young woman struggling to build her life, making mistakes like we all do. I held her hand and whispered, "It's okay. You're forgiven." She cried quietly, whispering, "I didn't understand what you gave up for us. Until now." I smiled through my tears. "You will. Life has a way of teaching us what love really means." That night, when Daniel walked me to the parking lot, he said, "Mom, thank you for coming." I looked at him and smiled. "You're my son, Daniel. I'll always come." He looked down, ashamed. I should have done better. I touched his cheek gently. You did what you thought was right. Now just love her. That's all that matters. As I drove home, the night was quiet. For the first time in a long time, my heart felt light. Not because everything was fixed, but because forgiveness had taken the place of pain. That was the turning point. Not when I left their house, but when I stopped holding on to the hurt. Sometimes love means walking away, and sometimes it means showing up anyway, even when your heart is bruised. The days after Emma's hospital visit felt softer, like life had suddenly learned to whisper instead of shout. For the first time in months, my heart didn't ache when I woke up in the morning. I still missed my home, the sound of Daniel's laughter in the hallway, and even the faint smell of Emma's perfume lingering in the kitchen. But it didn't hurt the same way anymore. It just existed. I kept myself busy, tending to Martha's garden, baking bread, visiting the library, and writing letters I never sent. Sometimes healing doesn't come from doing something big. It comes from doing small things slowly, with love. A few weeks later, Daniel called again. This time, his voice sounded calm, almost hopeful. "Mom, Emma's feeling better," he said. "We've been talking a lot about things we didn't before. She wants to see you again, properly this time." I hesitated, but my heart told me to say yes. "Of course," I replied softly. "Tell her I'd love that." So the next Sunday, I found myself standing once again in front of that familiar house, the one that used to be mine, now only a memory wrapped in bricks and windows. Emma opened the door, smiling shyly. She looked healthier. Her color had returned, her eyes softer than before. "Margaret," she said warmly. "Come in." I stepped inside. The house looked the same furniture, same scent, but it felt different. Lighter, quieter. Daniel came down the stairs, smiling when he saw me. "Hey, Mom!" "Hey, sweetheart," I said, hugging him. And for a moment, I let myself hold him the way I used to, tight enough to remember, but gentle enough to let go. We sat in the living room, tea steaming on the table between us. The silence was comfortable now, not strained. Emma took a deep breath. "Margaret, I've been thinking a lot about what happened, about how I treated you." I said nothing, letting her continue. She looked down, her fingers twisting together. "When you first came to live with us, I was scared. I thought you'd take up all of Daniel's attention, that there'd be no room for me. I was selfish. I didn't understand that love doesn't run out. It just changes shape." Her voice trembled. "And when I asked you to leave, I thought I was saving our marriage, but I was just breaking something that didn't need fixing." I reached across the table and placed my hand over hers. "Emma," I said softly, "you were young. You were learning. So was I." Her eyes filled with tears. "You forgive too easily," I smiled. "Maybe, but forgiveness isn't weakness. It's how we stop the pain from spreading." She nodded, tears falling freely now. "You're a good woman, Margaret. I hope one day I can be half of what you are." I squeezed her hand. "You already are. You just needed to see it." Later that day, Daniel asked if I wanted to walk in the garden with him. The air was cool, the flowers blooming brighter than before. "Mom," he began softly, "I don't think I ever told you this, but when you left, the house didn't feel like home anymore." I looked at him gently. "It wasn't supposed to. Home isn't walls, Daniel. It's love. And when love gets buried under guilt and misunderstanding, the walls can't hold it." He nodded slowly. "Emma and I talked about that. We're trying to do better, to listen, to be kinder." "That's good," I said. "Love doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be tended to." He smiled faintly. "You always make it sound so simple." "Because it is," I said. "People make it complicated when they forget to care." He laughed softly, then looked down. I'm sorry, Mom, for not standing up for you sooner. I touched his arm. You did the best you could at the time. That's all any of us can do. We walked back to the house in silence. Before I left, Emma hugged me. Really hugged me this time. Not out of obligation, not out of guilt, but out of love. Come for dinner next week? She asked, smiling. I nodded. I'd like that. That evening, when I got home, Martha was sitting by the window knitting. She looked up and smiled. How'd it go? I smiled back. Better than I expected. Maybe even better than I deserved, she chuckled. That's what happens when hearts are finally ready to listen. I sat beside her, watching the sunset paint the sky in soft shades of gold and pink. For the first time in a long time, I felt whole again. Not because everything was perfect, but because I was at peace with what wasn't. Weeks passed, and Sunday dinners became a tradition again. Sometimes at their house, sometimes at mine. We cooked together, laughed together, and talked about everything, from the past to Daniel's work, to the silly things Emma did in the kitchen. One evening, as we sat eating together, Daniel suddenly looked at me and said, You know, Mom, I think I finally understand what family really means. I smiled. And what's that? He looked between Emma and me, his eyes soft. It's not about who's under the same roof. It's about who shows up, even when they have every reason not to. Tears welled up in my eyes, but I laughed lightly. That's a good answer, sweetheart. One day, Emma handed me a small envelope. Open it, she said, smiling nervously. Inside was a key, simple, silver, with a small tag that read, For Mom. I looked up at her in surprise. What's this? She took a breath. It's for the little cottage next door. It just went on rent. Daniel and I thought, maybe you'd like it. Close enough to visit, but with your own space. I stared at the key for a long moment, speechless. My chest filled with warmth I hadn't felt in years. I looked at her, really looked, and saw not the woman who once pushed me away, but the one who was now opening her heart. I'd love that, I whispered. She smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. Then it's yours. The next month, I moved into the small cottage beside their house. It wasn't grand, but it was perfect. A cozy kitchen, a little garden, a window that caught the morning sun. I decorated it with old photos, lace curtains, and flowers Emma helped me pick out. Every morning, I'd see Daniel wave from his driveway as he left for work. Sometimes Emma would drop by with coffee or muffins. And on quiet evenings, we'd sit on my porch, talking softly as the sun went down. Life had come full circle, not as I once imagined it, but in a way that made sense. We weren't broken anymore. We were mended, not by time, but by grace. One night, as I sat outside under the stars, I thought about everything that had happened. The pain, the distance, the healing. And I realized something beautiful. Sometimes love isn't about holding on. It's about letting go, forgiving, and finding your way back, not to how things were, but to how they were meant to be. I whispered softly to the night, Thank you. Not to anyone in particular, but to life itself, for teaching me that even shattered hearts can shine again. The next morning, Daniel came over with breakfast. He sat beside me smiling. You look happy, Mom. I am, I said, smiling back. Finally, he reached for my hand. I'm proud of you, I laughed softly. You should be proud of yourself too, Daniel. You grew up, not just as a man, but as a son. He nodded, his eyes shining. I learned from the best. As he left, I looked around my little cottage. Sunlight streaming through the window, birds singing outside, the smell of fresh bread in the air. It was simple, quiet, peaceful, and mine. I closed my eyes and whispered, "This is home." The following months drifted by like gentle waves, calm, steady, and filled with quiet moments that I had once prayed for. The mornings became my favorite time of day. I'd wake early, open the window, and let the soft light spill across my little kitchen table. The scent of coffee filled the room as I watched the sun rise above the trees. From my porch, I could see Daniel's house, and every morning before he left for work, he'd wave. Sometimes he'd even shout, "Love you, Mom," before driving off. Each time, it made my heart smile. Emma and I found a rhythm, too, one built on small gestures that carried more weight than words ever could. She'd stop by with a warm pie or a vase of flowers from her garden. Sometimes we'd sit together without talking much, just sharing the silence. Other times she'd ask about my recipes, or tell me about her new work project, or confess little things she'd learned about patience and love. One afternoon, she brought me a small framed photo. It was of the three of us, Daniel, Emma, and me, standing together in front of my cottage, smiling. "I thought you might like to have this," she said softly. I ran my fingers over the frame. "It's beautiful," I whispered. "Thank you." She hesitated for a moment, then said, "I never told you this, but after the day you left our house, I couldn't look at myself in the mirror for a long time. I kept hearing the things I said to you. I was so ashamed." I looked at her, not with pity, but with understanding. "Sometimes we hurt people not because we want to," I said quietly, "but because we don't understand our own fear yet. You were afraid of losing what you love. I've been there too," her eyes glistened. "I think I finally see that now." I smiled gently. "And seeing it is where healing begins." She nodded, tears rolling down her cheeks. We hugged, not out of guilt, not out of apology, but out of love that had finally learned to breathe again. A few days later, I was sitting outside, watering the small row of roses Emma helped me plant, when Daniel came home early. He looked different, calmer, lighter somehow. "Big news," he said, grinning. "Emma and I are expecting." For a moment I couldn't speak. My heart fluttered in disbelief, then filled with warmth that spread through every corner of my soul. "Really?" I whispered, tears gathering in my eyes. "Oh, Daniel." He nodded, smiling from ear to ear. "You're going to be a grandma, Mom." I covered my mouth, laughter and tears spilling together. That's wonderful." He sat beside me on the porch. "We were nervous to tell you, but we wanted you to be the first to know." I reached over and held his hand. "Thank you. That means more to me than you'll ever know." The months that followed were filled with small joys. I went with Emma to her doctor appointments, helped her set up the nursery, and knitted little blankets in soft pastel colors. One afternoon, as I folded a tiny onesie, Emma said, "You know, I used to think being strong meant standing my ground. But I realize now it's about being kind, even when it's hard." I looked at her, smiling. "Kindness is what keeps love alive," she nodded, placing her hand on her belly. "I hope I can be the kind of mother you are." My heart softened. "You already are, dear. You just had to find your way." When the baby was finally born, a beautiful girl named Lily Grace, I held her in my arms for the first time, feeling her tiny fingers curl around mine. Her eyes were still closed, her breathing soft and rhythmic. I could feel her little heartbeat against my chest, fragile, yet full of promise. Daniel stood beside me, his hand on my shoulder. "She already loves you," he said with a smile. I looked down at her and whispered, "She's perfect." In that moment, everything I had been through, every tear, every lonely night, every word that once cut deep, faded into the background. All that remained was this feeling, peace. Over time, my cottage became a second home for Lily. She'd crawl across my wooden floor, giggle when I sang old lullabies, and tug at the hem of my apron when I baked cookies. Her laughter filled my home like sunlight. Sometimes I'd catch Emma standing at the doorway, watching quietly, a soft smile on her face. Once she said, "You know, Margaret, I used to think you were just Daniel's mom, but now I see you as mine too." Those words melted something inside me that I didn't even realize was still frozen. I took her hand and said, "Family isn't just made by blood or marriage. It's made by the moments we choose to love one another, even after everything." She nodded, and we both smiled through tears. Years later, as Lily grew and learned to walk, I often sat on the porch, watching her chase butterflies in the garden Daniel built behind the house. Sometimes she'd run to me with a flower in her tiny hand and say, "Grandma, this is for you." And every time I'd take it like it was a treasure. I'd think back to that dark day. The day Emma humiliated me. The day I walked away with tears in my eyes. If someone had told me then that it would all lead here, to this love, this peace, this family, I might not have believed it. But that's the thing about life. Sometimes the things that break us are the very things that set us free. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned to gold, Daniel and Emma sat with me on the porch while Lily played in the yard. Emma looked at me and said, "Do you ever wish things had gone differently?" I thought for a moment, then shook my head. No. If they had, we might never have learned what love really means. She smiled softly. You're right. I looked at her, then at my son, then at the child laughing in the grass, and I realized that forgiveness isn't a single act. It's a way of living. It's the choice to see people not for who they were, but for who they are still becoming, I whispered to myself. We all grow. Some of us just take the longer road. That night, as I tucked Lily into her little bed in my cottage, she opened her sleepy eyes and asked, "Grandma, do you love Mommy?" I smiled, brushing her hair back. "More than she'll ever know," she yawned. "And Mommy loves you too." I kissed her forehead. "I know, sweetheart. I know." As I watched her drift to sleep, I realized something beautiful. Forgiveness had not only healed my heart, it had built a bridge strong enough for love to cross again. And maybe that's what life is really about. Not avoiding the storms, but learning how to grow flowers in the rain. If this story touched your heart, I would truly love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Every message you share reminds me that these stories don't just belong to one person. They belong to all of us who have felt love, loss, and forgiveness in some way. If you'd like to listen to more stories like this one, simply click on the video that's appearing on the right side of your screen. Each story carries its own lesson, its own quiet strength, and perhaps something that speaks to a part of your own journey too. And if you'd like to support this channel and help me continue bringing more real and meaningful stories to life, you can send a super thanks in the comments. Your support helps keep these stories alive, and your kindness allows me to share even more voices that deserve to be heard.